Nonviolent communication is not about trying to replace how everyone speaks or listens to one another with like one monocrop modality or technique across the world. But if what you're saying or doing in your communication isn't working for you, then you might want to consider shifting, making a different choice. And that's really what this is about, is it's about choice and freedom to choose. There's so many ways that we've been conditioned to speak and listen to one another that we can continue to act out. But the truth is we're not actually at choice when we do that. We're just playing out habits that most of the time we've just learned from the cultures around us or been taught.
Welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season includes 25 incredible episodes devoted to the inner development goals. Based on the science of personal transformation, the IDG framework represents 23 skills needed for today's world. And of course, empathy is one of them. You won't want to miss a single episode, so hit the subscribe button now. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by two guests, Catherine Cadden and Jesse Chu, co-authors of the Ongo Book, Everyday Nonviolence. Catherine is an activist, educator, storyteller, and dancer with more than 35 years of experience facilitating innovative programming in nonviolence, mindfulness, and conflict transformation to people of all ages. She is internationally recognized for her work, including as founder of the Temba School, a visionary K-8 academic program that integrates the principles of nonviolence, mindfulness, art, and peace studies. Today, she serves as the program director at Baba Tree International and is the author of Peaceable Revolution Through Education, a book that champions the role of education in building a more peaceful world. Jesse is an artist and community leader who has dedicated his life to promoting practical peace. Jesse works to spread the principles of nonviolence globally as the executive director of Baba Tree International and in his role with the Center for Nonviolent Communication. His insights and experiences are also featured in 1,000 Hands, a guidebook to caring for your Buddhist community. Together, Catherine and Jesse lived in a beloved partnership. Both of them reside in Indonesia with their 2 children. I've invited Catherine and Jesse to join this special IDG series because their work is devoted to improving interpersonal communication, communication being one of the 23 traits of the Inner Development Goals framework. So I want to welcome Catherine and Jesse to the show, especially since you woke up at 5 a.m. to be with me today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
It's exciting. I'm a fan of nonviolent communication, and I knew that when I wanted to do this deep dive into communication, that I wanted to find people who are real practitioners and experts in this. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I promise to listeners and viewers that we're going to get into what is nonviolent communication if you've never heard of it before. But before that, let's start with getting to know you a bit better. So beautiful bio. Love the fact that this is a couple. I'm going to maybe ask how you, as a couple, use nonviolent communication, because I think there's definitely something to learn from that. But maybe if each of you could take turns in telling us all a little bit about yourselves, the twists and turns that got you into this work and what keeps you passionate.
Yeah, well, I entered through education. A real pivotal moment for me was when I was doing my student teaching. A kindergartner brought a gun to school, and this is back in '94, and this is in a privileged community in Marin County, California, and I watched the school's response was to create a grading mechanism, a report card, if you will, for how children feel, because they wanted to be able to identify kids they thought were maybe angry and possibly going to cause a problem. So they decided they were going to put up on the wall in the hallway when you enter the school a giant report card with the kids' names and then a grade for how they were feeling that day. They were to report in. And I remember thinking and saying out loud in the meeting, I'm a little concerned with us grading how children feel, because if they're already having challenges, and then we put a grade on it, how are we actually connecting to what's going on for them? And I was shut down pretty quick. I was a student teacher, and I don't have enough experience yet. So I had been involved in nonviolent philosophy for quite a while, and that was kind of the moment I went, hey, what happens if I put these ideas of mindfulness and nonviolence into a daily opportunity for students, even at this super young age, So I kind of began experimenting a little bit in my student teaching, and I'd get like 30 kindergartners meditating and trying out different things. But it was really starting my school that I got a chance to really experiment with this idea around what happens if and you all speak of it very much in the IDG, how to get these inner pieces put together so that then our outer actions reflect what's happening on the inner world. And certainly, having been involved in education throughout the years, witnessing, particularly in the US public schools, continue to deal only with outer, trying to deal with rules and regulations, but not really dealing with the inner world. We haven't seen a lot of change. We've actually seen it get a lot worse. And I've found similar things around the world as I went. But that was a key moment for me.
Holy
Yeah.
smokes. Holy smokes. How about you, Jesse?
I came at it from, I would say, kind of like a spiritual practice perspective, in that for me, a big pivotal moment was when my father died when I was 23 from esophageal cancer. And I was there with him in that last week of his life, and was there in that moment. He took his last breath. And when I witnessed his passing, like literally the moment of his passing, it was a palpable experience in my body. It was like one moment he was my father, and then when his breath left, it was just a body. And it was just visceral. I could feel it. And I never had like an experience like that in my life before. It was deeply affecting. And it changed the course of my life, because up until that point, I'd been studying film and animation. Coincidentally, both of us have been filmmakers and studied film, so it's kind of interesting that was part of our life path. But when that happened with my father passing, I kind of it opened up quite widely what I would do next with my life, and I ended up. I call it sort of checking myself into a Zen Buddhist monastery. Like and it wasn't like I had any real background in that either. It was just something that popped into my mind of like, okay, this is what I'm going to do next. And then I ended up doing that for 7 years. I ended up living and practicing as a monk at a Zen Buddhist monastery. And during that time, one of the other people who was studying there had been a nonviolent communication trainer and offered sessions freely to the other students while we were there. And it really connected for me when I was, on one hand, doing this sort of deep Eastern-based Zen meditation and study, and then learning about kind of this synthesis of Western psychological principles and practice, and the two really merged for me. And when I had a chance to then study with Marshall Rosenberg, what impacted me the most was watching him do these role plays with participants. And for me, it was like simultaneously watching some of my, the Zen teachers I most respected, how they interacted one-on-one with me and others, and like getting real, like practical, actionable steps for how do you actually do that? How do you engage in that in a conversation with another person? How do you relate to someone from this consciousness of nonviolence? and empathy. So for me, those were some of the big turning points in my life. Yeah.
Whew. So I can see what brought you together, working collaboratively, but maybe also together romantically and now as parents. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that gives us a real sort of a slightly deeper entry point into why you care deeply about the work you do. I think there's an opportunity here to talk about Marshall Rosenberg's work and what it has opened up for the world for those who practice nonviolent communication and believe it's really, really important. So, could you share a little bit about what nonviolent communication means? What are the nuts and bolts? Why is it important? What is the impact? Yeah, let's go there.
And I can't talk about Marshall without tearing up because for me, he's the old man. He was, I was so honored to get to play with him for decades. And literally I found the book Nonviolent Communication when I was at a friend's house when I'd finished writing my philosophy for education. I was getting ready to open the doors to this school. It was very exciting. And I was like, what am I going to do with all the parents? And so at my friend's house, I saw this little book on her bookshelf, Nonviolent Communication. And I'm like, all right, what's that? I'll give this to the parents, right? And it turned out that my friend who had given the book to my other friend was like, hey, this guy's going to be in San Francisco. You want to go see what he has to say? And we went in to this workshop and there's this he's older than me back then, this elder, like, playing a guitar and having these jackal and giraffe puppets. And I'm like, all right, I'm sold. I don't know exactly what he's talking about yet, but I like it. And he chose nonviolent as a specific word because of the translation from ahimsa, from Mahatma Gandhi's work around what it is to live without violence in your heart, like to that core level. How do we live without violence, even in our thought, in our heart, so that then our actions, our words follow that. And so, yeah, Marshall's work was profound in that it gave a tangible way. And we've talked about this a lot because I remember when we first met and you were talking about, yeah, we all live in a Zen monastery, but yeah, we get arguments in the kitchen. So, how do we actually interact? And so creating this, I call it a technology of speaking, of observation, feeling, need, request, kind of helps us take a breath and slow down what it is that we're about to say. So we have to deal with what's in our mind first. We have to think about and take things out of evaluation and just observe what's happening and relate it to what's going on inside of us, the feeling. And then Marshall writes it right in his book. He names the chapter, taking responsibility for our feelings is connecting it to a need. What is a universal need? And then how do we make a request to get that need met? And luckily I joined forces with someone who's an experiential learner like myself, and we both heard Marshall say, universal needs are something all humans have in common. And we're like, okay, well, let's see if that's true. And, so we've now, I don't know, we've worked in like 18 languages and 30 some odd countries and 6 continents, and we've learned there really is this base of universal human need that if we begin to use that languaging, we can begin to actually connect and relate.
Yeah, I mean, Marshall's purpose was he really wanted to support people to have the quality of connection where everyone's needs could get met through compassionate giving. Not through a sense of like duty, shame, obligation, a lot of the ways that normally we give to one another as human beings, but that beautiful thing that happens when you hear someone else's need or you recognize it and then you feel moved to give to it because out of compassion and not out of pity, but out of companionship. And so
Yeah, he would often refer to it like transforming our cultural crap, or recognizing domination culture, which can permeate all our personal cultures, that we move beyond that so that we really live in a please and thank you, type of interaction where we're always being clear about what it is we'd like to contribute to make life more wonderful, and how can I contribute to you? And yeah, I guess that would be it in a nutshell.
Well, so let me just jump in here because I want to actually make this really super crystal clear, pragmatic by inviting one of you to share like an example. So before we get there, so you can have that in the back of your mind as I'm speaking here. My master's degree is in communication studies. And I remember one of the first things on a chalkboard back in the day was like a little bubble on one side and a little bubble, and then a line that connected them, and then an oval that went all around that. Okay. And the idea was that there was somebody who was sending a message to the receiver, and that communication happened between a sender and a receiver within a context. Okay. And it was very, very engineering-ish. Okay. And then the question was asked, what gets in the way from a message that's been sent from a sender to a receiver that would destroy the message? Like the message wouldn't be the same that was intended, or so we complicated it. And I remember some of the answers were like, if you have a headache, if you're hungry, if it's noisy, all of these like real things that can happen that would, have friction attached to the message. But then you've got, much more than that, like all the feelings that humans have and all the human experiences and the ways we get triggered and the moods that we're in and all of the complexities of life that complicates it even further. So that with a bit of a backdrop for like, can you share an example of how nonviolent communication takes place by starting with a example of violent communication? I wonder if there's something that you do in your training that kind of really simplifies what you've just described so beautifully.
Yeah. Do you have a specific one coming up?
Only 10,000.
I can start with a simple everyday one just from the other day. I mean, so as we mentioned, we have two kids, and the other day, just before going to bed, our younger child had created like a disaster of like cards and crayons and everything is just all over the floor right at the time that it was time to just like we're actually in bed now, and so I could have gone for what is sort of my culturally conditioned habit, which is just to like give an order, like, clean it up, or, punishment, right? And this could be, you could translate this to adult relationships as blame, right? This is your fault. You created a mess, like, deal with it. Or, the other option that's also kind of very common cultural conditioning would be shame, turning the blame inwards, right? Oh, I'm a terrible parent. Like, I haven't taught my child how to be, a respectful kid who's going to get in bed without creating a mess, right? So those are our like two of the most common cultural habits: blame and shame, or guilt. But in this case, she was also saying, I really want you to read me a story. And so, I could hear in her a need for connection, but then as a parent, I'm also seeing this mess on the floor and thinking like, I've got limited energy. I could use some support. I need some order. So here are some of the needs on the table, right? I'm seeing my child has a need for connection, and I have some need for order and support. So a lot of that can happen in nonviolent communication, even silently inside. Like, I can recognize the needs on the table through my listening, of recognizing body language, what they're saying, and also listening to myself. And
I want to just keep holding those needs, because what I want to add here, based on what you said a little bit earlier about like what gets in the way, right? So here's what gets in the way. Immediately we go to strategy, and we think we have to figure all of this out by ourselves, and we get to strategy, and that's where we get gun violence, we get bombing other countries, we get, the actions we take as punishment, so then we can get back into our strategies. Or we get into thinking that these are in conflict. And that idea that needs are in conflict is a huge obstacle in communication. These needs are not in conflict. And that's like, it's like the secret ingredient for nonviolent communication. Jesse's need for support and ease, and Gloria's need for connection and safety, these are not in conflict. And so I just wanted to name that, because that can be a big pitfall for people, thinking they've got to solve it and that they're in conflict.
Right. Because I mean, at the end of the day, like, who wouldn't want both order and support and connection? Like I want that too, and at the end of the day, our child is going to enjoy life more, not only when they have connection, but also some sense of like order and support in their space, right? And so that's how we can see that needs are never in conflict. We all want all these things. And so the next step of nonviolent communication is to make a request, a request to meet all the needs, right? And we say request rather than demand, because request is what's going to invite the possibility that the person is going to want to give to those needs from the spirit of compassionate giving. If you make it a demand, then people naturally want to rebel or submit out of a sense of fear of punishment, right? So in this case, my request that I threw out to our our child was, how about this? Would you be willing to go ahead and clean up this space while I'm brushing my teeth and getting ready for bed myself? And if this is all clean up, once I've done that, then I'd be happy to read you a book. But I don't have the energy to do both right now. I need some support. And when I presented it that way, she was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. Like, whereas the moment before, when I did start to say something like, well, this space needs to be cleaned up, her first response was like, no, I want you to read me a book, So when I presented it more as a demand and a blame, it naturally invited rebellion. But when I presented it as a request and an invitation to meet all the needs, she quite joyfully wanted to give to that.
So first step is naming the needs, right? And recognizing that they're not mutually, in conflict, right? They're not in conflict. And then the second one was making a request. Is that right? That's the second step?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to me that there's different ways to navigate through what we call nonviolent communication. And there are two other steps that we teach as well, observations and feelings. But
and
because
you named there was that big piece you did internally. So there was a big piece done internally.
Yeah.
What you just named are the outward steps, right? Like getting the needs on the table and making the request.
Yeah.
And all the inner work Jesse did was going through separating out the evaluation and the observation. The observation is, there's fatigue, there's mess on the floor. There's a kid who wants, to go to sleep, right? So there's an observation, and instead of taking that into a judgmental place, Jesse took it into just seeing it for what it is, recognizing the feelings in the body, and then bringing the needs to the table. So there's an internal piece that gets done so that we can get to that external piece.
Yeah.
Right. And I can see the benefit of this form of communication, whether it's with children, whether it's, among partners, whether it's in the workplace with colleagues, whether it's out in the world with strangers. But it feels to me like it's such a heavy lift for people who want to engage in this, because they really have to be clear on how they're feeling themselves and have to want to come at this form of communication with generosity and kindness and compassion. So I just wonder if you could speak to that. Like, we're in a moment in 2025 where everything feels a little bit upside down, geopolitical shifts. We can't count on allies. There's bullies in the spaces. It's a lot of, harm that's being done to our environment. There's bullying online. Like, just the list goes on and on and on. How we're kind of not traveling a nonviolent communication path. So I'm wondering if you could make the case for nonviolent communication at a slightly higher level. Like, why do we need this in the world?
Well, I would say, the proof was in the pudding with my school that I ran, and then I eventually gave it to the parent body, which made it into a homeschool collective and a charter school that still exists up in Northern California. And so with the school, of course, I wanted user friendly. I wanted to get to the point quick, and I wanted kids to get into habits, right? Because, what we practice is what we become. And so it's about making the practices. And so a lot of the practices in our book, the Ongo Book, Everyday Nonviolence, a lot of those practices came from my experiment with my school. The proof was, years after several of my students had left, I got a phone call from a parent that said, I just wanted you to know that in Marin County, each high school, which has about 1,000 students each, got to vote and have a student represent that high school because they were now trying to fix relationships between teenagers and the police, right? And she goes, I just wanted you to know that when my son walked in, because he was voted and he was a former Tempest student, there was 2 other Tempest students there that had ended up in other high schools. So that to me right there showed that these kids who grew up with this practice of being able to internally connect, self-connect, and then be able to outwardly make requests, but then to be able to hear other people, because that's the empathy is a real key here around the ability to hear what's going on for someone else, even when you disagree with them. And so the fact that 3 students from my school, unbeknownst to them, all ended up in this meeting for how to solve relationships with police, to me, that was proof, my research, that there's something here that can actually solve a real social aspect. Because for me, my driving force has always been, how do we change the edifice, of the overarching structure of things simultaneously while we're changing the internal. And I don't think one can exist without the other. And
Yeah,
I can feel you. Go ahead.
No, I'll just add that, and for people wondering about this kind of for themselves, right? I think I can say that, the first thing I would say is if whatever you're doing is working for you, by all means, keep on doing it, and I mean that sincerely, that nonviolent communication is not about trying to replace how everyone speaks or listens to one another with like one monocrop modality or technique across the world. But if what you're saying or doing in your communication isn't working for you, then you might want to consider shifting, making a different choice. And that's really what this is about, is it's about choice and freedom to choose. Because when we're stuck in these conditioned cycles of blame and shame and the more evolved versions of like, canceling each other, or getting caught up in like kind of trauma loops and blaming, and it's like there's so many ways that we've been conditioned to speak and listen to one another that we can continue to act out. But the truth is, we're not actually at choice when we do that. We're just playing out habits that most of the time we've just learned from the cultures around us or been taught. And so if we're stuck in a habit of just, kind of submitting to what we've been taught or rebelling against it, then we're not actually at choice or freedom. And so nonviolent communication actually gives us a way to become aware of how we're actually communicating and relating to other people, and then giving us the tools to say, now you get to choose. How do you want to do it? And for me, the biggest thing with that is that not only you get to choose, you get to then experiment. So in every relationship, you get to try out different things, including your habits, and see is it getting you the results that you want.
So one of the things that got developed in my school was a real user-friendly empathy circle, where we would put the universal human needs on actual cards, put them on the ground, and the kids would sit in a circle. And then they'd take a chance to speak about what was going on, and kids would just hand cards to the other kids, and they'd get a chance to be seen for what was coming up in them, safety or connection or belonging or to matter. And that was a quick user communication tool. But one of the things that I was doing quite differently structurally was basing the academics on the needs. So inherently making mathematics and language arts be about that a kid can feel their own sense of belonging and mattering while they're actually in class. Because if we start taking care of needs in a structural sense, then the communication piece becomes just a component and part of that. Because we can sit and still use nonviolent communication if we still have all that old modality going on about, well, the blame and the shame and the guilt. So there really isn't one without the other. But what we've noticed is if we can get to this needs language quickly, we're much closer to finding a result that creates a much more wonderful life than the stuff that we've been used to.
Love that. And I want to ask and connect it now to the Inner Development Goals framework, because the series that I'm doing is exploring each of the skills one by one, knowing that there's a lot of overlap across, and that one influences the other, so they're not discrete. I want to read to you the definition they use. I want to ask you to comment and see whether or not, if it resonates, what you would add to it. And I want you to also maybe consider, since so much of the nonviolent work requires self-awareness, requires empathy and relating. It's kind of interesting that communication falls into the fourth category on the framework. So anyways, that's a lot of stuff to untangle, but let's start here. They define communication skills as the ability to really listen to others, to foster genuine dialogue, to advocate one's own views skillfully, to manage conflicts constructively, and to adapt communication to diverse groups. So a lot of stuff in that bundle. What resonates? What would you like to add?
I would say the way it resonates for me, of my understanding, particularly of nonviolent communication and the practice that we do, is like I use a simplistic form of, nonviolent communication is from the heart. And if you look at the English word heart, HEART, here is 4 letters. T, talking, is 1 letter. So speaking, communicating, empathy is 4 parts hearing and 1 part talking. Mm-hmm. And so what you just described really resonates for me in what we're trying to do.
Yeah. I like that definition, and for me it makes a lot of sense that it comes in that framework after stages around being, thinking, relating, because kind of like what Catherine was pointing out earlier, there's a lot of inner work, and that's a lot of what actually nonviolent communication teaches, is that inner work that leads up to what you say when you open your mouth or how you're listening. So yeah, I like both the words that they articulated for the definition, and I like kind of how it fits into the overall framework with the other kind of what I would consider the inner work beforehand.
And Jesse, you did a great job earlier describing a situation with your daughter, and I definitely have questions about what it means like to model that behavior with children. Then they pick up on it and they become better communicators themselves. Then they go out into a world where not everybody is as skilled in that, and how that kind of, if you've noticed, if they have anything to say about that. I also wonder, so pick up on that thread if you want, but I also wonder as an adult in a partnership, and a longstanding partnership, it looks like, if you have any moments that you maybe want to point to where you were like, whoa, that was amazing. Like how an experience was transformed through nonviolent communication, adult to adult.
So many.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you were speaking, the first thought I had for people to self-reflect is, we often tell kids, don't do this, and then later we turn around and do exactly what we just told them not to do, right? Like don't use guns, don't be violent, but here as a nation, we're just going to bomb other countries, right? So it can be very, very big, very quick. And I was thinking about what came to mind immediately was when we had to do lockdown when we were traveling to Taiwan during the pandemic. So nothing like a family getting to share a really small room for 14 days. And so I think we had hit an edge, and we actually just, I don't even remember what the argument was about, because it was, stuck in a room for 14
stuck
days.
in
So
one
we
room.
started
It's just
arguing, and it was great because Ozzy, our oldest, just came up and said, "Can we just breathe and hold hands?" And so we just stood in a circle in this hotel room and started holding hands and breathing. And that to me was, when you said what you said, a moment of like, oh my God, okay, we haven't totally screwed up as parents.
And Ozella was 7 at that time too.
Yeah.
7 years old. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one thing I like about nonviolent communication that I always heard Marshall say is we were born with it. We were born with this technology, but we've been, and what I often like to say is, our kids weren't born, with racist bully behaviors or all these things, all these labels that we can give that we go on in our society now. They weren't born with cancel culture. These are all strategies that they learned from us, from the adults around them, and from society. But we do have this innate technology that we can access if we just take a moment. And that's what I was saying about the user-friendly, quick empathy circle that we do, because even just going through the motion allowed everybody just kind of to start to arrive back to something. And a student up in Canada one time on one of our outdoor programs said to us, "Oh, I get it. You guys aren't teachers. You're just reminders." And that's what all I feel we're doing in our work, is reminding people what we're actually born and capable of doing, and being able to really listen to each other, hear the needs, and then make these requests that can give to life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the one thing I'll just add, you're asking about like these kind of like amazing transformative moments. And I think the truth is, a lot of times engaging in this process is about opening to the miracle, because you're not coming in with you might have an idea of what you'd like the outcome to be, but by putting the connection first, you're kind of opening yourself and anyone you're connecting with in that moment to creative possibilities to emerge that are most of the time better than what anybody had thought of beforehand. Because you're opening to the connection first, rather than coming in with knowing what's right, or knowing what the best solution is. So it actually adds a bit of wonder to life in a way, to navigate using this form of communication.
And that gives to another quick, simple technique people can immediately start doing is, just ask yourself in the moment, do I want to be right, or do I want to connect? And if I want to be right, I stay quiet. I don't engage. But if I want to connect, then I'm ready to engage. And that's like another just super quick assessment people can make. And they don't have to have years of skill.
Love that. And I have to ask, and I don't know where this question's coming from, but I know that you're both filmmakers. You mentioned that earlier, and storytellers and educators. So I wonder if you could, because storytelling is a form of communication. Do you have anything you'd like to uplift vis-a-vis how to become better storytellers?
I'm going to look to Catherine, because I consider Catherine more the natural storyteller than me. But
so the question, just so I understand the question is how do we become better storytellers, or
the importance of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I do think we're all natural storytellers, and I think the piece is, again, about not wanting to overlay a moralistic judgment on something. I notice kids often don't really get into listening to stories when they're being told what the lesson is while the story's being told, but they love a story that engages, and so there's a way we can bring ourselves to the story by relating what's there for us, and then bring that alive. And so with my my two kids, we've actually we have what we call the ongoing story. And I think for parents, this is a great way to connect with your kid, is develop a character with your kid. I mean, Ozzy started when Ozzy was 2, and it's this owl that in the story, Ozzy goes to visit from time to time with different forest creatures and asks questions and does things. For Gloria, it was very different. It's actually deep in the water because she's a swimmer. But these ongoing stories that can just be creatively told with your kid gives them a chance to ask questions. We're often wondering, how can we get our kids to talk to us? But engaging them to create a nighttime story together, on an ongoing basis over the years gives them that freedom and that space to maybe talk about something that is a little difficult for them, but they're not going to tell you directly, but yet they're like, oh, hey, can I have the owl story tonight? I have a question for the owl, so you can really bring it into everyday life.
Go ahead.
Yeah. My natural tendency is to want to just pause and take in these things. So it's hard for me to just jump in and add, but I'll just add that, so, one thing I find really helpful is, it's interesting, actually. Nonviolent communication also kind of can teach you a bit about how to become a better storyteller, because the observation piece is really about getting really specific with what you're noticing or details. And so even when you're recounting something, to be like catching on the specific details of what happened, that really helps bring a story to life. Like when I named with our the situation with our kid, where it was like there's cards in the ground, crayons on the floor everywhere. It's like getting into those specifics helps bring a story to life. And then similarly with nonviolent communication, the feelings component, like bringing the emotions into it, like feeling, not just naming like I felt sad, but actually like I felt devastated, like feeling it in your body and then sharing the report from what it feels like in your body. That also brings a story to life.
So that's a great segue question to something that I want to chat with you about, which is around mindfulness, right? So, you started this school, Catherine, where, it was based on the tenets of nonviolence, but also mindfulness. And I just wonder, like, what role does mindfulness play? If you want to be a better communicator, like, how can we start by paying more attention, being more mindful?
I mean, my quick and easy answer is, you have your breath. If you don't have your breath, you're not alive. So, it's a quick and easy tool you will always have with you. So being able to return to the breath gives more space before we speak. It gives us a moment to just self-connect and self-reflect. And you don't have to, the breath is there. So you don't have to go to school for many, many years to learn how to breathe. You just actually breathe, and that creates space.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of mindfulness as kind of it's a thread that goes through the whole process, and there's not a moment that you stop with the mindfulness throughout the whole process of communication, from even when you're silent all the way through the speaking, and even afterwards, noticing the lingering effects. To me, it's, like in the IDG framework, it's like the presence, it's the openness, it's the inner compass, it's so many of those aspects. And I think the beautiful thing about mindfulness, like Catherine's pointing to about that the breath is always with you, is that it's something that anybody can do. In fact, we're always doing it. And it's just about like bringing a little bit more consciousness to it. And so there's no effort, there's no big effort involved, or you don't have to be like particularly smart or intellectual or anything. You don't have to have like huge training in it. It's as simple as, a child learning, I don't know. It's so simple. It's part of who we are. So yeah.
I was thinking about the framework, going from being to acting, right? Like, how do we get from being to acting? And I was thinking about a practice that we came up with that we call being and doing, but literally, like you can write down, what do you want to do today? But then the being is, what need do you want to do it? What's the energy you want to do it with, right?
So it's your to-be list and your to-do list.
Right.
Yeah.
And so having that be a daily practice is like another simple way to just get that mindfulness going, just inside of everything. Because for me, nonviolent communication and mindfulness aren't tools I pick up and set down. They've become an integrated way of life. And so I think that's one of the simplest ways to do it, because I want every choice I make to have that infused in it.
Love that. Oh, I love that. And that way we are human beings also, right?
Right.
Yeah,
We can't separate that out.
Yeah.
So I can't believe we've run out of time, but I always end my conversations, and thank you both so much. This is such a delightful conversation. I'm going to include all the show notes for people who want to check out nonviolent communication and your books and your work, and just amazing. Thank you, thank you. I know it's going on 6 a.m. for you now. The question I like to leave our conversations with is always the same, and that is, can you think of a time in your life, whatever comes to mind, when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
Yeah, well, one of the ones that comes to my mind, it happens a lot for me in different contexts, but one of the moments where it was particularly impactful was as a new father, when I was starting out as a parent, and it was very challenging for me for a lot of reasons. And I had a colleague and friend in nonviolent communication named Morris, who was really generous with his time and offered as a friend. He actually reached out to me when I was driving him to the airport one time, and he could see that I was struggling, and he said, "Hey, if you ever, have struggles, just give me a call." And it was vulnerable for me to take that leap, even with the work I've done and the friends I've had, but just to pick up the phone one day and call him in the midst of the struggle. Um, and he received me, as a friend, as a companion, and as a fellow father, and he just offered me empathy for the challenges and validated, the realness of it, without judgment, without giving, without dispensing advice, but just holding the space for me to kind of move through what was present for me in that moment. And that meant a lot, to have someone to be there for me in that way, in that super vulnerable moment for me as a new father, and not try to tell me what to do, or judge me, but actually just hear me. And that gave me a lot of space to feel what I was feeling, without it feeling like something was wrong with me. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that story. And I guess how lucky with two guests on the show, we get to hear two stories in this episode. How about you, Catherine?
Yeah, well, I think that piece about the parenting, because here we are, people that have some skill, and have, and I purposely waited till I found the partner I wanted to have children with, and waited till I'd done some inner work before having children, and then to hit a whole new learning curve. There's just things you just can't predict, like a world pandemic. Who knew we were going to be raising children during a pandemic? So I love that. And it funny, you made me think of something else that happened when actually my first nannying job when I was in Kansas. Like that was a real moment. I think it was the first time I really felt on the receiving end of empathy. I was nannying, and I had yelled at this woman's children. Like I had done the response that I had grown up with, right? Like, the child hadn't done what I'd asked. So I'm 18 years old, and I just screamed at them the way my father used to scream at me. And then I felt the shame and just devastated. So when the mom came to pick the kids up, I was actually still in tears and kind of shocked, because I'd kind of scared all of us, my level of violent communication. And And I remember she actually put her hand on my shoulder and she's like, oh, that must have been really scary for you. And here I was devastated because I thought I'd caused major harm to her children. And then she was empathizing with me about how scared I was. And that was a moment I woke up of, oh, there's such a different way to be in the world, because this woman had just so compassionately seen me in that moment, even though I was the one who was the threat, right? And then we worked it out. Like it was a profound moment in my life.
What a powerful story. Oh, both of you so generously sharing. I'm sure there's parents who are listening can relate. And the reason I love this question so much is I never know what I'll hear as stories, but it always grounds me and serves as a reminder to anybody watching or listening that, hey, you know what? When we do extend empathy to others, it's so big. And if we just, leaned into that, turned up the volume of empathy in our lives, like imagine what the world would look like. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Anita.
for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks
And
for being such great guests. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, or maybe you'll even take a nap. I'm noticing that you're wearing Jesse. I know that you have a big day tomorrow because or at least in Bali, you have the one day. Do you have 10 seconds to explain what that is?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, tomorrow is Nyepi. Nyepi is a Balinese holiday that where everyone stays at home and is silent and doesn't make
the
sound or
airport shuts
music,
down. You're
electricity,
not allowed,
TV,
don't use
internet.
electricity.
Yeah, so it's I think what's really special is there's a consensus agreement in this island to all honor that together, whether you're a tourist or a resident. And so it's like a day where you get to feel the world without light pollution, without sound, without, and you get to see the stars and you get to hear the birds and you get to feel the air. It's a really different quality of life. It's
Well, I
quite beautiful.
hope you savor that with your children, and maybe you'll hold hands and take a big breath together too. I have that visual. It's such a beautiful visual. Thank you for that. What a gift.
Can I put in a quick final comment? Um, uh, well, it may not be the final comment from everyone, but I just want to say that for me, I really like to make sure that anyone listening leaves with some sense of what they can do. And this is just a deep passion of mine. And so you mentioned early on the book we wrote, the Ongo Book, Everyday Nonviolence. And I just want to say that the reason we wrote that book is because we did trainings and retreats for people all around the world. And the question at the end of those trainings is always the same. It's like, wow, this is great. This is inspiring. But what do I do now? Or, I got some skills,
How
but
do I do it in my life?
how do I do it in my life? And so we actually wrote that book specifically so we could just hand it to people and say, here's a step by step. And what it is it's a daily practice, whether you're an individual doing it, or you have a partner you want to do it with, or you have a group like a church group or something you want to practice together with. We literally wrote that book to answer that question. So what do I do now? Like whether it's empathy or mindfulness or nonviolent communication, that's actually why we did it. So if anyone is listening to this and is now wondering, okay, this sounds great, but so where do I start? I would say, take a look at that. And if you get the ebook, it's super cheap, So just
accessibility was really important to us, that it's accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you added that, Jesse. You're the next person that will get the copy will be me, and then I hope everybody who's watching or listening will also check it out. I will include everything in the show notes so people can just go link it up and take a look. Yeah, putting the work into practice. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. I want to thank everybody who's been watching or listening, and we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
Thank you so much.
If you know someone who'd benefit from this